Okay, so I've mixed my plaster in advance, and I've got a wall around my foam, and now I've got the hard task of pouring the plaster. It's going to be really runny at first, and I'm hoping this wall is going to contain the plaster, and then I'll need to use a spatula or even my hands to just, as it firms up, to start pulling the plaster back up into a dome around the clay former. And then I've also got this template that I've made, which when I've removed the wall is about 1.5 cm sort of width around the clay foam. So that should help me make sure that the plaster is of a similar thickness all the way around. One hopes. Let's try. So the first bit is pouring this, and it's very runny at this stage, but you've kind of got to get it poured for it to start firming up. So I've no choice really but to just trickle it over and let it start doing its thing. I'll probably need to mix more plaster and do this in batches. So I'm just letting that creep along and run down. Trying to be really steady with it, because if I just sort of tip it really quickly, we'll just end up with a moat around the bottom of the dish, and it won't have found its way into the nooks and crannies, and really this first layer is doing that job. So I may, because of the way I'm having to pour it, I may get in the way of the camera and you might see just my head for a moment or two. I'm trying my best to give you the best view possible of this, and I'm keeping an eye on my moat as well as I'm pouring. So it's thickening up now. It's still pouring quite fluid, but it's definitely thicker than it was when I first started. I'm getting close in some areas to breaching my walls, so I need to be careful. You can see in the dish, it's actually quite gloopy now. That's a good consistency, but I've got to get on that on here before too long, otherwise we just won't have the thickness of the walls that we need. So just try a bit more. I'm surprised, I'll be honest, I'm surprised how much plaster it's taking to just get a covering. Oh, I think I'm about to breach that wall there. It's just gone a bit here. It's not too bad elsewhere. So now it's a bit like when you're icing a cake. Just going to try and pull it up a bit. This plaster is a high density plaster, like a dental plaster. So in other words, the particles are much finer, and that means when you mix the plaster, it's a much harder, denser consistency than say a regular plaster of Paris, which we've worked with previously. This should pick up fine detail really nicely, and it should have more resistance in the kiln. It's still a little runny really to be pulling it up the walls here. I'm just gently doing this. Quite soon I'll be able to remove this outer wall and there'll be enough strength in the wet plaster for me to pull it up the sides like on a cake, you know. It's just starting now. You can probably see here how it's holding a little bit better. It's getting better. But I suspect it's very thin. You know, it's a very thin wall overall, and I'm going to have to mix more. But once I've got the first amount on, it should be a little easier. Yeah, it is very thin. As I'm pulling up, where I've got my design in relief, the plaster's pulling up, but it's also revealing some of those more projected areas. So it's definitely going to need more. But I'm quite pleased with how I'm beginning to be able to control this. I'm going to remove the outer wall in a minute, because it's starting to hold, and I'll be able to get right down to the plastic sheeting and pull up a little bit easier. I might even get my hands in there. Shouldn't be afraid of materials. It's good, you've got to respect them. Plaster can be quite a volatile material. There are lots of health and safety issues around the dust when it's before it's mixed, and then also because there's a heat process, you know, a change of state when you mix with water. You do have to be aware, because this can actually get quite hot, and there have been cases where it's created burns. That's usually when you're mixing lots and lots and lots of plaster and putting layer upon layer, and the heat can't escape from deep down in the mix. But the way we're working is more that you'll feel, you'll see and feel a sort of just a warmth to it. So notice how it's more like icing a cake now. Can you see it's going off? It's really good. So I'm just scraping out the last bits in this tub, so I may as well add that on. And I'm going to remove this wall now. You see how it's holding? So that's a good sign. It's not collapsing under there. And so now I'm just going to start to pull it up like a cake. You must wonder what my cakes are like. I've never been a baker, but I don't mind this type of thing. I quite like it. So getting quite a bit deposited on my hands, so I'm going to try and keep that in there. As you can see, I've got well, I don't know if you can see, I hope you can see, there's a circular ring around the base, which I did in felt tip, and that's on a sheet of paper underneath the plastic sheeting, and that's my boundary. So I know that I need to be keeping plaster up to that ring. So I'm just smoothing this now. I'm going to look at my template, so you can see that I've got some way to go, haven't I? Quite a long way to go. So now that I've got that, I'm going to mix more plaster, put the ring back, because obviously initially it's that pouring stage, and you know, I don't want it to tip down the bottom and then run along the table. I need to contain it until that plaster is firm enough to pull up again like a cake. So I'm just going to pop that back. Doesn't matter that it's got plaster all over it. You know, this will just go straight in the bin afterwards. It's literally there as a barrier. So pop that back. And then what I'll do is I'll stop this video and I'll mix the plaster, and then when I'm ready to get applying the next layer, I'll switch on again so you can see the process. So there we go. Now I've got to turn my video off and I've got plaster and clay all over my hands, so hopefully I can do that